You know, bankruptcy is a subject near and dear to my heart and pocketbook. When you have a lot of debt, sometimes there is no other way out. And there is no shame in bankruptcy for 99.9% of the people who do it the right way. They do it with reputable attorneys, and they do it the right way, and they follow all the rules. You know, the creditor industry would have you believe that some people are cheating, but that is such a small percentage of people. Michael Wink is someone who knows that. He's someone who represents people, and he believes in following the rules, but those rules can benefit you. Because bankruptcy is supposed to be a fresh start, Mike, a fresh start.
Absolutely.
And they really mean it. I mean, these laws give people a chance to live their lives again.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that I want to talk about today is actually automobiles.
Yeah, because they don't want to devastate you, so you can't get a fresh start. So let's talk about some of those exemptions.
Right. Well, for people considering bankruptcy and they're wondering about what it's going to cost them and what they're going to lose and how they're going to be able to have that fresh start, one of the first questions that they ask is, will I be able to keep my car after bankruptcy?
Yeah, I need a car for work.
Right, and the answer to that is often yes, but there are definitely some limitations that people need to understand about automobiles and bankruptcy.
Yeah, if you have a paid-off Maserati or something, or you know, that's a lot different than having a car with not much equity. Let's talk about that.
Exactly. So the law that applies is essentially an exemption. And an exemption in bankruptcy is a type of property and a dollar amount that you're allowed to keep after bankruptcy for part of your fresh start. And there's lots of different kinds of exemptions. But in the state of Colorado, for motor vehicles, there is a $5,000 exemption, and that can apply to one vehicle or multiple vehicles.
So that means if you have a car worth $5,000, the simplest example, it's worth $5,000, you can keep it.
That's right. And if you're 60 years or older, then it's a $10,000 exemption, and if it's a work vehicle, then it's a $20,000 exemption.
Okay. What if you have a vehicle and you owe money on it?
That's right. Well, your equity is what the exemption is applied to. So if you have a $20,000 vehicle, for example, it's worth $20,000, you owe $15,000 on it, you have $5,000 of equity, you should be fine. Let's say that you have a $22,000 vehicle and you owe $15,000 on, now you have $7,000 equity.
What would happen?
If you're under 60, and it's not a work vehicle, you're limited to a $5,000 exemption. So here in this scenario, you have $2,000 of what we would say is non-exempt vehicle equity.
What would happen with that $2,000?
Basically, if you filed bankruptcy with that situation in Chapter 7, you would have to pay that $2,000 to keep the vehicle.
Right.
So the trustees in Chapter 7 will typically give you 6 months to a year to pay that off. Or in a Chapter 13, you could pay that off in your plan over 3 to 5 years. If for some reason you didn't want to pay it, I can't understand why you wouldn't, but if for some reason you didn't, the car could be taken, sold, you'd get your $5,000, the loan would be paid off.
What if
and the
they
$2,000 would go to your creditors.
What if they can't get what the car's worth? A lot of times somebody says it's worth something, but they would sell it for pennies, wouldn't they?
No, they can't.
They can't.
In bankruptcy, they cannot sell the vehicle for less than your exemption and the loan amount.
Okay.
So if for some reason they can't sell it, then you keep the vehicle.
So have you ever had people challenge that, saying, I don't think it's worth that?
Typically, it's a negotiation. I mean, in real estate situations, I've seen it play out more where you sort of play a game of chicken with the trustee where you say, go ahead and sell it if you think you can sell it for more than the exemption. And in the motor vehicle arena, typically it's just a negotiation, and we settle for some amount, and the debtor pays it, and you move on.
What about the payments? Do I keep making the payments on my car then, if I want to keep it?
Absolutely. The other important limitation that people need to understand about bankruptcy and automobiles is that the lien will remain on the vehicle if you have an auto loan after bankruptcy.
You got to make your payment.
Exactly. So technically what's happening with an auto loan in bankruptcy is your personal liability is actually coming off of the note. So if you default on the loan afterwards and the car's repossessed, they can't come after you for the difference between what they get for the car and what you owe. But the lien remains in bankruptcy, which means that they can take the car if you don't pay on the loan. Now, that's the starting point for liens on automobiles in bankruptcy, but there are some things we can do in bankruptcy to reduce the value of the lien, to reduce the amount
Give me an idea.
Well, in Chapter 7, for example, there is a right of redemption.
What does that mean?
And that means that basically a debtor in bankruptcy can buy a car for what it's worth instead of what they owe. So let's say you owe $15,000 on a vehicle, it's worth $5,000. You can buy the car in Chapter 7 bankruptcy for $5,000. Now, most people typically don't go into Chapter 7 bankruptcy with $5,000, but there are banks that specialize in giving you those loans so that you can do that.
Really?
Yeah. Now, you pay a little higher interest, so you got to look at that carefully, but that is one option. In Chapter 13, there is this thing called a cram down, where if you've owned the vehicle for 2.5 years, you can reduce what you owe to what it's worth today. So in that scenario, $15,000 owed, $5,000 value, you're going to pay $5,000 for the vehicle in your Chapter 13 bankruptcy, financed through the plan at 3 to 5 years, 6% interest. So that's a very powerful tool for people that have a car that's underwater and they're looking at Chapter 13 bankruptcy. And if for some reason you can't do a cram down, maybe the car's worth more than you owe, or maybe you haven't owned it for 2.5 years, you can still refinance it in your Chapter 13 bankruptcy at 6% interest for 3 to 5 years.
Now, there are so many things you need to know when it comes to bankruptcy. This is one of them. He talked about exemptions with motor vehicles, a wealth of information. And Wink and Wink, Mike and his wife, they do this as a matter of a daily practice. People come in all the time to ask questions. If you have questions, free initial consultations, always.
Absolutely.
Wink and Wink, you can get a hold of them here. 888-NOW-WINK. 888-NOW-WINK. That's 669-9465. Online, Wink and A-N-D. winkandwink.com. They're also a proud member of my referral list at referrallist.com. We get great reviews on them. 888-NOW-WINK, winkandwink.com.